Your library director. Thank you to head of social studies department Pat Brady, right, for letting me do some work on this while I'm at work. All right, and my students who have heard me run through this presentation already in order to get ready. So, how do you start a town? Like, that's the real question, right? And that's hard for us to understand today because most of us haven't seen a town created, right? Towns have been well established for the last 100 or so odd years here in the state of New Jersey. But in the 1840s, we start to see the creation of counties, okay? Specifically 1841, where this map comes from, we're able to see the creation of Hudson and Bergen County. Now, why does that happen? Well, the folks that are going to be down in present-day Jersey City, they've had enough of being part of this bigger collection. They want to be their own town. So they decide, let's split the counties. However, in 1843, the folks in the rest of Hudson County are like, well, where do we go? So this idea comes to create two towns, all right? The township of Bergen and the town of North Bergen. And I notice they are very close to each other here. Present day, if we were to plot these on a map, this is the Bergen Square neighborhood in Jersey City. And then you have Journal Square right around here. And this is 5 Points near the modern day courthouse down in Jersey City. Right, so it is interesting to see that in 1841, they were calling 5 Points in Jersey City North Bergen. Right, now that's going to be a kind of term for everything north of these railroad tracks. Everything north is going to be North Bergen. It's actually originally called the Villages of North Bergen. And we're going to take a look at that here as we follow a couple of roads. So before we go any even further, right, again, we'll take a look at all these things. So we'll follow Kennedy Boulevard here. So this is all, again, Jersey City, but again, 1843, the township of North Bergen. So we follow Kennedy Boulevard along here. Still, we're in Jersey City. We're in the Heights now, okay? And then we get split off here. And this would be modern day Summit Avenue that comes in here. And then here we get to North Bergen, or excuse me, we get to North Bergen right about here. Okay, on the property of George DeMott, right? And if you can see here, I know the map is kind of folded here, but Secaucus Road is going to be right here. So we're down on 6th Street in North Bergen. So this is officially the start of the town now. Now we follow Kennedy Boulevard, and it hasn't really changed much as we've gone, right, throughout time, especially downtown. So like I said, it's the Villages of North Bergen. So once you would have passed the old DeMott farm, we would have gotten into a section of North Bergen called Weavertown, right? And most of the villages are named after geographical areas or something they're producing. Now, Weavertown is named simply because there's a ton of people in the weaving industry down there. This is going to be your area about 16th Street to about 20th Street today, or 22nd Street, give or take. Something interesting that we don't really know a lot about, we're still looking into it, is that there was a US military installation there. This is also, or what we assume it was for, if you notice out here in the meadows, there is no railroad yet. So we assume they are there to oversee the construction of the railroad, right? Again, very interesting. Kennedy Boulevard also has gone through numerous changes. Most people, especially older residents, will remember when it was called Hudson Boulevard. However, before that, it was called Dollytown. And even before that, it was known as Ridge Road, okay? So again, you would follow Kennedy Boulevard, and then you get into the area of Schutzen Park, where 32nd Street is today, right? Not a lot going on there comparable to what we know. However, this is where it gets a little sketchy now, where the roads kind of shift and zig and zag. Kennedy Boulevard changes from a big thoroughway into a small roadway. And then we cut down to Hackensack Plank Road, right to the very infamous Three Pigeons neighborhood. This would have been one of the more settled areas at the time of North Bergen's creation, as it dates back well into the 1750s of people living in this section of North Bergen. Right down the road would be New Durham, right down on Tunnelly Avenue. This is in the neighborhood of 51st Street, give or take today. Again, a very heavily populated area. And Kennedy Boulevard is not what we know it as today. There's really not a lot going on there. At the time of the town's creation, it's very wooded. It's swampland for the most part. If anybody at home has ever lived near Kennedy Boulevard, or here, you know, you get a lot of water in the basements sometimes there, right? It comes up from the ground because it's built on top of old swampland. When you keep coming around, you don't have any other annotations, and that's because no other neighborhoods were established at this point. These people that were living out here could be comparable to those old Western movies of people living out on the frontier. Okay, they were very far away from anything, and there's not many landmarks until we get up to the border, right? Or you get to Fairview Avenue, or as it's locally known, Dan Kelly Hill, right? Named for Dan Kelly, who basically charged a toll to go up the hill. You come up here, and then something of interest happens around the park. There's actually some property belonging here to a major sexton. Right, and what's really interesting about him is we just discovered he is one of the only veterans of the War of 1812 to be from North Bergen, right? And he lived there, made his life, and then, you know, retired and did everything there. The area here presently would be Hudson County Park, right? And again, notice some of the swampland loadings, and then even the roads here. This river would have been modern day Gorge Road. And then as we come over here, you have the roads that go down to Bulls Ferry, and then even down near the present day Galaxy. Now, what happens, right? How did we lose all of these towns in 1843? We just went from Jersey City Heights all the way to the Fairview border. What happens? Well, Hoboken decides they want to be their own town. Okay, they are going to bail on North Bergen in 1849, and they are going to take Weehawken with them. Okay, so now we're down a little bit. By 1855, Hudson Town is formed, which is modern day Jersey City Heights. Then we get West Hoboken wanting to leave, West New York leaves, and finally Union City, or Union Hill at the time as it's known, leaves. The last part of North Bergen to break away is going to be Secaucus in 1900, right? So up until 1900, North Bergen controlled a very large part of the area here that we know in Hudson County. However, we see it slowly start to trip away. Now, what do we know about what was going on government-wise here in North Bergen, right? Because for all of our lives, we've had and acted under the Walsh system here in North Bergen, where the government is elected as a mayor and committee people or commissioners. Before that, it was kind of a free-for-all. Each neighborhood elected somebody to be in charge of the neighborhood. And then it was almost like a battle royale, where they just all fought each other for stuff. The prominent districts, and again, the districts in these areas kind of excluded a lot of other people, which kind of led to why these towns wanted to leave North Bergen. You had district number 1, which was Bulls Ferry, so they dealt with everybody on River Road. You had Secaucus, which obviously dealt with the people of Secaucus, South New Durham, which would have been downtown North Bergen, Jersey City Heights, North New Durham, which is basically where we are today, right? The kind of racetrack section of town. And then you had East New Durham, which dealt with West New York, Union City, right? And kind of in the area of Lincoln School today. Each district had 5 men serving as committee members. And again, remember, these are the villages of North Bergen, which, you know, we really don't have these neighborhoods today, but each one had 5 people representing them. And again, this went on from 1843 until 1930, the way that we ran the government here in town. Now, when we talk about the creation of town in the actual document, and I won't bore you with all that because it's like 1843 legal jargon, which was enough of a headache when I had to read through it the first time at the State Capitol Archives. But there's a lot of references in the one section to the Saunier family. Now, the Saunier family are really, they're, you know, no pun intended when I explain this, but they're deeply rooted in North Bergen history. The Saunier family belonged or owned the original Frenchman's Garden, right? Which the Frenchman's Garden today is effectively near Flower Hill Cemetery. We don't really have any markings on here, but it's got a great, great history. King Louis XVI was told by the Marquis de Lafayette, who once visited Three Pigeons and was here during the Revolutionary War down at the Battle of Paul's Hook. He said, hey, and again, not in my North Bergenese, but he said it probably much better. He said, Louis, the land here is very fertile. We can grow a lot of crops and a lot of different things. we should buy some property. So on the word of the Marquis de Lafayette, Louis XVI bought a huge piece of parcel of what would become present-day North Bergen. He sent over two guys, Andre Michaud and Paul Saunier. They then were left with the idea or with the job of creating a garden to grow plants for the French royalty. That lasts for a very long time, probably into the late 1870s, the garden is there, and then the cemetery takes it over. So for a very long time, we're shipping plants from North Bergen to France. The poplar trees that all grow in France, there's a theory that they all come from several trees in North Bergen, right? So that's a pretty cool thing to say. Now, the Saunier home is going to be basically town hall for the first several years that the town is in operation. And the reason they picked the Saunier home is because people knew who he was. So they all said, okay, I know where this guy lives. We're gonna go do all our business there. They would have the meetings with those council committees from all the different districts. And I'm sure it was a very quiet time every time they had those meetings. I'm sure everybody met peaceably there. But that is going to be there. And again, his home would have been near about 61st Street and Kennedy Boulevard today. Now, when we keep looking, something that something every resident of the United States wants to know about is your property taxes, right? And what to do about property taxes. They've gone up a bit since 1843, right? They're not as low as they used to be. The problem was today you go to town hall and you pay your taxes, right? You pay them online. Okay, in 1843, you had to go to all random places to pay your taxes. And you didn't know where to go until about a week before they were due. So they weren't trying to get one over on anybody or anything like that. It just was like, we need to find a place to collect taxes in, a bull starting district. Where can we go, right? Tax collector went out and actually collected taxes at different hotels, at different taverns, at different restaurants, right? You would go, give the money, you'd give your receipt, and you'd be on your way. Again, they would go through these locations in North Bergen, right? And that's how they would do it, right? Very different way of doing things. Now, there is another interesting tell, right, in this creation document, in the one article. They keep referencing five corners, though. Five corners of North Bergen, the five corners of North Bergen. Now, we have six corners, right? And originally, when we did this, the article, a lot of people were like, six corners, it's got six corners, not five. And, I said, well, we're talking about five corners in Jersey City. Remember, 1843. That's part of North Bergen. So you had to go down to five corners if you wanted to get married or if you wanted to do any business that needed some type of official documentation. So people who lived up on present day, say 88th Street, wanted to get married, you had to go all the way down to Newark Ave, down to five corners and do all your paperwork, which ironically, you kind of still have to do today anyways, because that's where the courthouse is, right? So as much as time has gone on, a lot of things stay the same. Now, when we look at this document too, there's something I thought this was so interesting. Maybe it's the dorky government teacher in me, but the term freeholder comes up a lot. There's a massive section, it's almost 2 pages long, on what a freeholder is supposed to do. Now, why I think that's interesting is because we're the only state that knows what a freeholder is. No other state in the country has freeholders. It is a uniquely New Jersey thing to have a freeholder. So again, I thought it was pretty cool. Now again, what exactly is a freeholder, right? Now again, it's basically comes from that the idea is they are a clear estate owner, right? They are freeholders. They own their property outright. So they have this kind of position where they are, again, chosen, right? It's a chosen freeholder, where they are elected to basically be this representative of any other property owners, right? So it is a really interesting concept, right? And it's very, again, uniquely New Jersey, which I think that is even way more interesting. Now, we know who the first two were, right? And one of them has a major legacy in the county. And it's a very disputed legacy. The first one, who kind of nobody knows about, is a gentleman, a lawyer named Edwin R.V. Wright. Okay, the other one is John Tunnelly, and the dispute I'm talking about is how to spell a guy's name. right? On the actual documents we've seen from the 1840s about Mr. Tonley is Tonele, okay? Now we know he's had descendants, and we know that the name has changed a little bit, right? But we up here like spelled with 2 L's, Jersey City like spelled with 1 L, and you know, how Siri says it when you get directions, they say it all different ways. But you know, again, that is going to be the kind of first 2 major freeholders we know, right? And one of them is going to have an entire street named after, right? In the entire county. Today, we have 9 elected freeholders in the entire county, right? So from 2 guys representing everybody in all of Hudson County, we got 9 now. So again, it is pretty wild to see. Now, they do talk about elections, right? Again, with the elections, they said in the law there, you have to have an election every year for your committee people, every single year. Now, again, when we talk about, you know, we hear the word committee people, we don't think commissioners, right? But in reality, they're talking about the representatives having to be elected every year, right? So you could imagine in the 1840s, 50s, 60s, that must have been, you know, some hell of a time for politics. But you see a lot of leading names come out. You know, you see a lot of people, the Danielsons. They are leading family in North Bergen, probably one of the most important families in town, as they create most of these streets and things that we have today. They were major players. You also have the Earl family that comes out, right? The Garrett Earl and then those folks, they're massive influences on the area, especially about bringing people into the area and developing the area. Now, this bill goes through, right, very fast through the entire Senate process in New Jersey, right? It meets no restrictions. It is read 3 separate times and unanimously passes through all 3 separate times. That goes through on February 8th, 1843, and then it passes the assembly on February 10th, just 2 days later, after 1 reading. Now the town is created, but there is going to be some issues. We're not officially a town until the first town meeting. And the first town meeting wouldn't be set until April 15th at Mr. Saunier's house in about 1843, where you just had to have those elected committee people or commissioners just agree to basically become a town. And that's it. North Bergen's created. And it's been standing here now for 179 years. We've changed our borders a little bit, right? We've added a couple of things. And today, right, it's a pretty interesting thing to see a lot of the legacies. Now on this map, I guess 2 of the big legacies, I think, right here, right? Garrett and Henry Newkirk, right? Famously named Newkirk Avenue is named for them. Somewhere a little further up, you know, I've always lose him. He's always got a small piece of property, but he was a big player. Is Abel Smith. Abel Smith, Smith Avenue is named for them, right? Something I think is really interesting, and I think the guy got robbed. If anybody's from Gutenberg, you're gonna be like, they can't believe it. 1 person owned the entire town of Gutenberg, right? Generally by the name of William Cooper. And he sold it in the 1870s for $10,000. That was it. And then after that, the Woodcliff Land Company came in and bought it, and that was the end of that. You also had, very similarly to today, grand estates along what would become Boulevard East. Mr. Cooper had a huge kind of luxury garden there. His neighbor, George Decay, one of the most interesting people I've ever read about and researched. He shows up in like a civil war in Brazil and Argentina and says he's a commodore. And the Brazilian government's like, cool, here's a boat. And like he just gets involved in a war. And he comes back to the United States, like all this decorated war hero. And like, you know, that's it. Like he lives the rest of his life as a commodore, which he dubbed himself. George Suckley, right? Again, he owns a ton of property and he has a lot of relations with Fulton, Robert Fulton. He's very active in getting the ferry systems going back and forth. He actually fights very hard to make sure the ferry leaves the Hudson County borders versus getting all the fame up in the Englewood, the Edgewater locations. You then come over here to the Dwyer property. They are going to be responsible for basically the development of the Shady Side neighborhood in North Bergen, kind of that kind of forgotten neighborhood in North Bergen, right off River Road. There's a ton of interesting people that did settle this town at first. And a lot of them, again, they stuck around here, they intermarried, right? They developed communities, and the communities they developed are all the communities we're left with today, right? Bergenwood, Woodcliff, New Durham, Meadowview, right? All these places we've known all our lives basically come from all these folks that just were like, I guess I'll just move to North Bergen, whatever that means in 1843. But that is what I got for you guys. I'm glad to take any questions, go over anything again.
And for those of you who are attending online, you can ask questions in the chat box and I'll read them out loud.
Saying about like streams and things like
Sure.
that, and how a lot of us are affected with the water. Like I'm on 88th Street and we have on a hill,
Sure.
and we have a ton of underground streams. Where did that originally come from?
Sure. So those streams all originally come from Hudson County Park, or the property that will become Hudson County Park. But remember, we're sitting on top of the Palisades, which is bluestone. So water doesn't seep into bluestone, say like granite or sandstone or anything like that. So the water level in Hudson County, especially in our town in North Bergen, is very high. Which leads into another fact, right? So we have all these rivers that kind of sped off a little bit, and they drain some water. But if you've ever noticed, right, and I tell this to people when we talked about the cemeteries in North Bergen, if you ever notice the cemeteries are all on that side of town, right? And the reason is not because like people live on this side of town. No, those cemeteries predate a lot of that. It's because the water is going to flush out that way, right? Which is why the people on the hills, I grew up on Durham Avenue. So yeah, I'm very familiar with that. But that's why the ground is so very fluid that all the water will rush downhill, because of the water is just kind of sitting here with nowhere else to go. So simply because the water table is high between Boulevard East and Burton and Kennedy, if you live on the other side of Kennedy, you have to pay the price of, nature, I guess. But yeah, that is gonna be where all these kind of go to. Actually, one of the streams is still semi-visible. It was refixed up during the WPA projects during the 40s. So if you're ever down on River Road, right off of Bulls Ferry Road, after a big rainstorm, you ever notice where like that, all that water flushes out? That's one of those original streams, and during the 40s and 30s, they just basically capped it. And that's still gonna flow through there. So it's actually gonna be that stream right there, right? Because this is gonna be Bulls Ferry Road right here, and that's where the flood comes out.
I would assume that water eventually gets into the river.
And yeah, eventually would make its way into the river, yeah. So again, right, I mean, there is some, we didn't really, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, I guess, what the civil engineers used to think when they redid these things. If you got a natural flow of water, just let it flow, right? Nobody's already there, so it's not gonna really bother anybody.
I do have two questions in the chat box.
Okay.
The first one is for me, actually.
Oh.
They want to know whether the presentation is being recorded. Yes, it is being recorded, and it will be available on the library's YouTube channel if anyone wants to watch it again. The next question, have you discussed the founding of Boulevard East and why Kennedy Boulevard loops around to become Boulevard East? Boulevard East is the most beautiful location on the Palisades.
So Boulevard East is actually really interesting because it's like a project that almost didn't happen. You had Hudson Boulevard at the time, and it gets up to where it gets today, right? About the 91st Street area, right? Where it meets Bergen Boulevard. But there is this idea that it starts in the teens, really, and then it works its way into the 20s, that we have to do something to save the Palisades in Hudson County. Remember, prior to, I guess, all of us, right? The Palisades or River Road was extremely industrialized. So factories and all these different operations were down there. But there was also a lot of quarrying that was done off the Palisades. And if you ever really look at the Palisades, I know that's weird, like I'm not suggesting go to River Road and look up, but if you're ever down there, you can see these kind of crisscross lines that go across the Palisades. Those are the old dynamite markings. They would drill in and then blast away. Actually, Donnelly Park in West New York is named for the gentleman who forefronted the Save the Palisades kind of movement. And the way they said, let's save them, is put a roadway there, right? If there's people driving there, they cannot keep quarrying away at them. So that becomes now the idea of, all right, great, we got here and nobody's gonna bother us. And then after they lay the road out, they go, where does it go? Right, it's just running from Weehawken to basically where Hudson County Park is, and like, all right, what do we do now? Right, so they then create what is called the Boulevard Loop, which is where Boulevard East connects with Woodcliff Avenue in Hudson County Park and then connects you to Kennedy Boulevard. Right, again, not to keep picking on navigation systems, but if you ever take some of them, it'll say take Kennedy Boulevard West, right, or take Kennedy Boulevard East, and like some people get freaked out. Kennedy Boulevard East, what is that? They don't know what that is, because we're just so used to the colloquialism of no, it's Boulevard East, right? But Kennedy Boulevard West, so that's how Boulevard East actually becomes, right? And then when they open it up, it's like a big to do, right? Because they gotta sell this thing now, right? Like we didn't just waste all this money on Boulevard making this road for no reason. And they actually have a massive parade of cars from about 76th Street to about 58th Street in West New York. No, why those streets? I have no idea. There's no real reason why. But they have guys come in cars and kind of they're driving around and there's bands and there's all this big to do and all the pomp and circumstance. And then there's even a bigger one when they add lights to the road, right? Originally there's no street lights. Then they add street lights and they have a whole other big celebration. You can go there at night, right? You can walk around at night. Boulevard East is extremely interesting, and it's important. It's a very important road, not just in North Bergen, but the county. But we'll leave the. It is the big draw for this town. Even when the town's being created, especially in the early 1900s, you have so many building companies that come here to try to make a profit off of the location and its proximity to New York City. You have the Woodcliff Land Improvement Company, who might be the smartest guys out of all of them, because they just bought the land. And then you'd have builders come in and be like, hey, I want to buy that, and they would just sell them the property, and then that was it. Somebody I talk about a lot is James Thompson. He's the builder. He built 500 homes in North Bergen, all along Boulevard East and Park Ave. He is the famous designer of 75th Street, the red brick road. That was his idea. He actually created an entire district that was supposed to have the red bricks. So from 75th Street all the way to the park was supposed to have red brick roads. Unfortunately for him and his design team, they were doing it during the onset of World War I. And I don't know how this happens, I guess labor shortages, but there was a brick shortage. So he only got one street done. And then by the time the war was over, he was moved on from North Bergen. So James Thompson was big, Thompson, Oscar Publius was another big guy. And they really took advantage of the Palisades, they took advantage of Boulevard East, and they took advantage of the views. There was even an attempt to, West New York had it once, Hoboken had it once, and we had like small rumblings in North Bergen that they wanted to make a bridge to connect us to Manhattan. But again, if you ever stand on the top of the Palisades and you look across, that's physically impossible to do. Or that'd be one heck of a slant going down. But there was a big push to put a bridge from about 77th Street straight across the river. Now it never came to be. I think people looked at that and said, you guys are nuts. But the idea was there. And again, it's almost impossible to talk about the town's history without talking about our relationship to New York City, right? And the New Yorkers that wanted to come over here. But yeah, that was a long ramble, but you know, once I get started.
I've got a lot of questions now,
Okay,
Jeff,
perfect,
so I'll
man.
keep
All right,
going.
all right.
Next question, who started the apartment buildings? I live in a state-of-the-art apartment building from 100 years ago.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so the apartment buildings, again, there are a lot of different builders that do them. They were specific to the apartment buildings. So each one is a different one. We actually just found out, now his name escapes me. We just found out the gentleman who built the one right here on 79th Street, Emberline Avenue. I think Mango was the name. He built that, and he actually owned a home on Boulevard East. Unfortunately, that home is long gone. It was replaced by the the Briarcliff, the big apartment building that's there. And yeah, they're all different builders. They're all pre-war buildings as well, right? None of those big massive apartment buildings we have in town were built after World War II. All of them were built before World War II. And then you can tell which ones were before World War I because usually they don't have elevators, right? Any of them that were built in between World War I and World War II might have an elevator, right? But if you have all, you know, if it's like a 6th-floor walk-up, that's before World War I. But if they want to know who built it, tell them they can always contact us and we could look into it for them. I'm talking to you two right now, telling you Joseph, that's long. But yeah, if you're interested in whoever built your home or your apartment, you can reach out to me, we can look it up and we can try to find out whatever information about the property.
Awesome. The next question I have, this is a bit of a long one.
Okay.
How did North Bergen wind up with that landlocked piece of land at the end of Fairview Avenue? The only way to get there is to go up Tunnelly through Bergen County and turn left on Fairview Avenue and drive all the way to the end.
Yes, so how do we end up with that? We didn't end up with it, we just kind of had it all along. And it happens by mistake. It's kind of just forgotten land, right? Bergen County, Fairview doesn't know it's there, Richfield doesn't know it's there, and it's never really inhabited. And it's kind of just marshland, and it goes by the name Orchard Park for a while. Somebody tried to farm it, and it just didn't work out. Mainly because of the proximity to the rivers and stuff. You would think it would be a good idea, but it just wound up not being a great idea. So we end up with just kind of like chains that like nobody knows it's there. And when you take a look again, when you look at the districts and you look at the way people voted and stuff, it was easier for those folks to get to North Bergen than it would have been to get to, say, Cliffside Park or Richfield, right? Because again, the development doesn't happen on the slopes of the hills. It happens kind of above on the flatter parts. So that's how we end up with that neighborhood. And that neighborhood has a really interesting history. Unfortunately, a lot of it is it's very spotty because they were so far away that if you didn't live there, you didn't know anything about it, right? So you have this interesting hotels and things that were back there and roadhouses, you know, which is, you know, it was always seems to be everything we see about it is like the big party area, right? You went back there for a good time. Today, that's like hard to imagine because you're like, yeah, there's just junkyards back there, like there's nothing back there, right? But yeah, we end up with it again, just pure, just chance. Just the people that were there were like, yeah, we're from North Bergen. The end. And Fairview was like, all right, cool.
The next question, did the streets plan on coinciding with New York City? I'm assuming that they're referring to the numbers.
Sure. So they don't actually coincide with New York City, okay? Prior to June 1st, 1940, it is just, it's mayhem in the entire northern end of the county, okay? And we have to go back a little further from 1940, right? In 1926, West Hoboken, which is downtown Union City, joins together with Union Hill, which is uptown Union City, to form Union City. Now, they start this whole problem, okay? They have streets that are the same names. So the Postal Service is like, I don't know where this goes. Now, they figure out what to do in Union City, and they just change a couple of street names, right? Problem is, West New York has some of the same street names, North Bergen has some of the same street names. And now the Postal Service is like, we have no idea what's going on. Is this going to somebody in North Bergen, right? Is this going to 47 Elm Street in North Bergen or 47 Elm Street in Union City? I don't know. So in 1940, the Postal Service actually tells us we have to do this. So it wasn't the towns like, yeah, the Postal Service is like, figure it out now. So we still look at Union City, and Union City has 1 to 44th Street made already. So North Bergen just goes, well, okay, we'll just continue the numbering, right? So if you ever come across old street numbers, you know, in research or anything like that, just subtract 44 from your current street, and that'll be the original street number, right? So North Bergen had like a 38th Street, right? 36th Street, you know, 25th Street, but they're really talking about streets like in the 70s, right? In present times, right? Streets up in the 70s. So it does throw people off a little bit when you're doing some research. We've had somebody has shown me like a really old mortgage once for a house that was on like 14th Street, and they're like, I don't know where this is. Like, I found this, and they told me it was my house. And it said like Traphagen Street on it. I'm like, yeah, well, that's the original name for the street, you know? And then they're like, well, where's the mortgage? And the mortgage is from like 302, like 26th Street. And they're like, is this in Union City? I'm like, no, it's, you know, it's 80th Street, right? It was a mortgage place on Bergen Avenue. And like, you know, they're just like, I don't know what's going on. I'm like, these are the postal service. But yeah, so that's wild, right? A lot of people, that's kind of like this weird, I don't know, urban myth that we changed them to match up with New York, right? But we're not actually lined up perfectly with the streets in New York. So that's all because the postal service was like, figure out how to make our jobs easier.
Perfect. Next question is actually a two-part question.
Okay.
First, can you talk about the racetrack section and why it's called that? And second, how many named sections exist today and what are they? For example, racetrack, wood track,
Sure.
etc.
Okay, so the racetrack, I mean, oh man, how much time do we have? The racetrack in short is called the racetrack section because there was once a racetrack here, the Gutenberg racetrack. Now, this was never part of Gutenberg. However, Gutenberg, believe it or not, and I always tease the kids from Gutenberg in the high school about this, Gutenberg was once more popular than North Bergen. So when people from New York came over, they didn't say, oh, we're going to the North Bergen racetrack, because nobody would have known what that meant. They said, we're going to the Gutenberg racetrack. So the Gutenberg racetrack actually went from 81st Street and Bergen Line Avenue up to 90th Street. And then would have been in between Kennedy and Bergen Line Avenue. Massive 1 mile long track. It is in action from about 1880 up until about 1910. After the horses stopped running, which oddly enough, the horses ran 365 days a year there. Rain, snow, heat, didn't matter, right? Actually, a lot of the famous images of the racetrack are horses running in like a foot of snow. It was lawless. It was just a lawless land. Racetrack shuts down because New Jersey makes horse racing illegal for some time. And then they do a lot of car racing. We have some great pictures on our Facebook page from, I don't know how Detroit ended up with it, but the Detroit Public Library has them. And it's early car racing that would have been going on there. There's actually stories of early flights landing near the racetrack here on Bergen Line Avenue. This was a runway for early flights from like here to like Connecticut, like people were flying. So the racetrack is just named after that. In 1920, they knock everything down, they grid out of the streets, and they lay it down. So that's how you get the racetrack. Now, how many neighborhoods are there in North Bergen? If you're asking me, there's like 26 neighborhoods. But if you're just you're gonna ask like a old timey local North Bergen guy, you might get like the racetrack, Bergenwood, Meadowview, New Durham, and then like downtown, right? If you ask like a young kid today, there's only 3 neighborhoods in North Bergen. There's downtown, midtown, and uptown, right? That's it. But when if you do look at North Bergen, you look at a modern day map of North Bergen, you will see that there's a ton of neighborhoods in North Bergen. And oddly enough, like real estate people really like the neighborhood names, right? Obviously, because like, oh, the beautiful Tyler Park neighborhood, right? You know, so like they'll name things after the traditional name. So, you know, downtown you have Tyler Park, right? You have Weavertown, you have, you know, the New Durham sections, you have, you know, Van Glanville, you have Buena Vista, like there's a ton of historical neighborhoods that are starting to see some reoccurrencing, right? They're starting to come back up now. But to simplify it, 3, uptown, downtown, midtown, that's it. But again, we have a ton of information on all of them. So if they need a specific neighborhood, just please reach out to me.
Perfect. The next question. I lived on Boulevard East growing up. What are those castle-like stone pillars around the park?
So and this question comes up all the time. They are just decoration. That's all they were. Most likely the original purpose of them was to be storage for maintenance. Oddly enough, one person designed all the county parks. A gentleman by the name of Charles Lowry. He designed North Hudson County Park, Lincoln Park in Jersey City, Bayonne County Park, which is down there, West Hudson County Park in Kearney, and a park down in Hoboken. We're the only one that has that. None of the other parks have these towers. We don't know. So he doesn't make any notes in any of the interviews he did about what the towers are there for or anything like that, but everything we can find is they're just simply maintenance towers. So that's where for storage things and purposes like that, they were never like a toll or anything like that to enter. So we believe they just serve simply as decorative purpose, right? Just a grand entrance to the park. But that's about it. I know everybody wants it to be something like cooler, like, you know, like everybody's like, was it like a medieval castle? It's like, no, Charles Lowry in 1918 just was like, this is gonna look really nice here. They did originally have a cover on them though. They had red Spanish tile, a four-sided, square kind of sitting on it, and it was really nice looking. We only have images though of postcards with it. There's no original footage or photos of them, but yeah, again, decorative purposes, and then later repurposed. But so I mean, I didn't look at them, but benefits of being town story. Nobody asks questions when you're climbing things, I guess. But no, yeah, they're just kind of decorative, so enjoy them. Right, we're the only county park that has them.
Next question. When did the movie studios close down on Boulevard East?
Sure. So the Ideal Movie Studio or the Bergen movie studio, RCA owned it for a while. They really are only active from about 1900 to about 1920. That's when it's the Brennan Studios or the Ideal Studios is kind of interchangeable. After 1922, 23, they kind of start to slow down, right? That's when we start seeing the move away from the East Coast. We start seeing Hollywood become a thing, the cheaper land and nicer weather. So they become more storage from about the mid 1920s up until 1954. Two kids fooling around with a book of matches actually set it on fire. And because there was film in there, right, the film caught fire, made the fire even worse. So we actually lost a ton of film history when that building went on fire. The most famous film ever made there was the 1920 Fall of the Romanovs, right? Which told the story of the Romanov family, right? From Russia, right? During, World War I and all that stuff, right? Really great article out of a gentleman who grew up in Shadyside tells about how when the school was in Hudson County Park, when U.S. Grant School was there, the kids would cut school to go and be in extras in the films. Now, the Fall of the Romanovs was this really big, well-documented film. They built an entire Russian village in Hudson County Park. And they had all these people from North Bergen just come and be extras, and just walk around, wear like Russian clothing and, walk around, and kids would just cut in school and go hang out and try and get movies and stuff like that. But unfortunately, that film is gone. It's lost. Nobody knows where it is. It's on like one of the cinematic like lost treasures list, right? That people are desperate to find a copy of this thing because of the cultural impact it had. But yeah, the movie studio unfortunately shuts down early 20s and then just becomes storage. But there are a ton of famous people who kind of make their way through there. Buster Keaton did some films there. You had Charlie Chaplin allegedly did one film there. But again, that's kind of like, he worked with Brennan on a film, was it really there? We don't know, right? The evidence is not really there, but I'd like to say he did. One other thing before I wrap that one up is there's a great term in film that comes from not just that film studio, but all the film studios that were here on the Palisades. When a show ends and you don't know what happens, well, what's that called?
Cliffhanger.
It's called a cliffhanger. That comes from these movie studios because they would literally, woman, right, the damsel in distress would hang off the side of the Palisades, and she's a cliffhanger, right? So again, now in the movies there was a resolve, but where the term and meaning comes from is you didn't know if you were actually going to save the girl during filming, right? So again, Hollywood and labor laws, thank God. That's where cliffhanger comes. It comes right here from our Palisades, right from the film studios here. So that's what we got.
All right, I don't know if you're going to be able to answer this next one. Why can't the red brick road be fixed?
I think it was just recently they updated it. Not too long ago. That was just completely updated.
I think about 3 years.
Something like that, right? Now, I mean, I don't know about if you're talking the engineering aspect of it, yeah, you're right, I'm definitely not gonna have the answer to that, but. I think it's a really impressive thing that they did redo the red brick road. I remember that had some serious going in there for a long time. And everybody wants to go, like, that's one of like the, when people are like, what's the top tourist attraction in North Bergen? It's the red brick road, you gotta go see it, right? Because it's not cobblestone, it's not any, it's bricks. But I don't think there's anything that needs to be fixed there, but I don't live there. I wish I lived there, but I don't.
The next question, are there any families from the original founding of North Bergen still living in town?
So no, there's none left. A lot of them kind of moved with the change of farming to industry in the area. Again, you look at some of the lots that these people owned. They owned massive acreage of land, right? So when they sold everything, right? So they really had no reason to stick around. They took their farm and moved, another part of the state, right? And again, we're not talking even in the 20th century. We're talking some of these people are living in the 19th century, right? They're living in the late 1800s. I think one thing we don't understand is, and it's weird because today you look around and you see new buildings going up and a lot of construction in all places. But we don't really understand how fast this area developed in like 20 years, right? It was just like, hey, there's a farm here and now there's 400 houses. Like, we don't know what that's like to see that kind of expansion. So these families that originally were here, they've been long gone for a very, very long time. Some of them really tried to stick around, I think, but eventually it just became a thing of just, let's sell the big piece of property and kind of move on. But no original families are still in town.
The next question, how did North Bergen get Braddock Park / North Hudson County Park? Okay, so remember the park is about 104 years old, okay? What happens about 104, 110 years ago actually starts is the Beautify America project. That starts in Chicago, right? And basically, some people in Chicago said the urban areas don't have enough green space. So they send out all these people to like try to scout areas to put green space. So Hudson County was kind of target numero uno, as the development was going on. So the county got a ton of money from the federal government to create some green spaces. And that's where they hired Charles Lowry, right? Lowry comes as this really well-respected landscape artist. I believe he went to like Yale University's landscaping school, which doesn't even exist anymore, but like, it's Yale, right? Like he's gotta be good. So he goes up there and gets his education and comes back down here and they're just like, have at it, right? And that's why you see all the Hudson County parks are all built between 1918 and 1922. They're all constructed at the same exact time. He kind of works on them all at the same time, right? He's here one week, tells the guys what to do, then he's in Jersey City, then he's in Bayonne, then he's in Kearney. So that's how we end up with this. It's just kind of the same way Jersey City ends up with Lincoln Park, right? And Kearney gets West Hudson County Park. It's really because the federal government looked and said, these people have nowhere to go, right? There's no green space. This is just going to be overdeveloped and factories or whatever. So you needed to create these spaces. So that's how we end up with a county park here in town. The next question, can you tell us more about the old pump track in Braddock Park? Why was it removed?
The old pump track?
Pump, P-U-M-P is what they said. I'm not familiar with it.
With that one.
All right, Johan, if you will give us some more details, perhaps he'll be able to answer that question. So I'll just move on to the next question for right now. Let's see. Question about Liberty Avenue. Was it called Germany Avenue before and changed during one of the World Wars? I heard that before, possibly from one of the webinars.
Sure, yeah, it actually was called Germania Avenue, right, prior to World War I. Once World War I comes, there's a massive German anti-sentiment takes over this area. And you know, they kind of, and even to work in Hoboken to some extent, Hoboken during the Star World War One was actually called Little Bremen, they nicknamed it that. Today, right, or actually back then, let's start there. Schools in Hoboken, there's so many German immigrants in Hoboken. Hoboken public schools are taught in German, right? That's the type of population we're talking about. That's how many people were there. So once World War I comes along, this whole area is the staging ground for troops to leave, right? Troops are leaving out of Hoboken. So there's this kind of, I guess, I don't know if it comes from the towns or if I came more from the people, right? Kind of the patriotism of World War I, kind of just crushed any identity of German life whatsoever here. And Germania Avenue was one of those things. It was a casualty of World War I, and they renamed it Liberty Ave, right? Because again, it's a war, right? But what are we fighting for? Freedom, liberty, all that stuff. So that's how Germania Avenue kind of gets erased from history.
The next question, is there a map that has all the neighborhood names on it?
Yes, there is. We have it on our Facebook page or on our blog page, actually, the North Bergen Historical Society. It is called the Neighborhood Map, so that is on there. You can check our Facebook page. There's links to it there as well.
And there's also a link to it from the library's
On the
website as well,
library
I believe.
as well. But yeah, that's on there.
Next question. I think this is a comment rather than a question.
Okay.
On Broadway, Danny Rose was filmed at the Summit. Copland was filmed below Palisades in the marshes and woods.
Sure.
The next question is the final question that I currently have. It's a very open-ended question. Is there a question no one has ever asked you before that you're surprised is not asked?
The pump one.
The pump track question, yeah, the pump track question, that's blowing my mind right now. I think a question that nobody ever brings up. I think, you know what, I'm looking around the room and I can see some of the images that are hanging on the wall. And I think the one question that people don't ask a lot about, which always surprises me, is people don't ask me like a lot about why Columbia Park shut down, the old amusement park on 32nd Street. Nobody really asks why it stopped being a thing. And I think that it makes me really, I think that sticks out to me because the park was so mad, it was huge, and it's effectively Six Flags, you know, of the 1920s and 30s. But people just kind of are like, oh yeah, there was a park there, and yeah, right, nobody ever asked them why did it stop happening, like what happened? You know, did people stop going, right? Did they just decide to sell it? Like, so, you know, I think that's what that always kind of sticks out to me, that nobody ever asks about. Because again, it's this big hulking thing that people have seen postcards of, and now somebody actually just brought it to our attention. There's a picture that somebody found on eBay of, like, you know, a couple at the park, you know. So, you know, I think people know it exists, and I think that shocked me that nobody wants to know more about it. That one freaks me out a little bit. No, maybe not freaks me out, that was a bad choice. But that's a weird one nobody talks about. And then also I think something that nobody really talks about or asks about a lot, which surprises me, is what like life in the 1920s was like in North Bergen. Because that's like a really interesting piece of history for people, you know. It's like the roaring 20s, you know, and I've always expected to get more questions now that we're in the 2020s. So I think people not being interested in the 20s, especially because that's the real development of the town, right? That's where we see the big change into housing, and the racetrack is built, and, you know, the apartments are going, and there's a lot of people moving in and out. So I think that's another one that you know, makes me really interested, that people don't want to know more about that time frame. But I think that might be a personal thing. I think I'm really interested in that era, you know, the Prohibition era, and, you know, all these stories that come out. And, you know, we did a great presentation over, I think that was over the summer, right? No, maybe a little before, about, you know, George Fuso, who was basically a beer baron, right? He was a rum runner that controlled all of Hudson County, right? And nobody really looks at that and goes, ooh, that's interesting, you know, or wants to know more about that. But maybe that's just me, I don't know.
And if anyone is interested in that, we do have that recorded and on the library's YouTube channel.
That was Kennedy Boulevard, Fuso's Dugout, is that related to?
They are, yes,
Where it was.
little distant from them, but yeah. George Fuso was, and again, I think it's so funny because I grew up in the same neighborhood that this gentleman kind of grew up and operated in, and now I know the name, right? My whole life I knew the name. And he kind of was this guy who was like, you didn't mess with him, right? It's just like, you're like, wow, this guy lived down the block from where I grew up, like, and you know, he didn't take any guff from anybody, and he controlled what came in and what came out, and who got what and where it went, and they tried to stop him. The bigger names in Manhattan tried to come over and shake him a little bit, and he was like, no, I'm good, like, you know, just pay me my money and you'll get what you want, you
I'm sure there
know?
were quite a few characters like that in Hudson County.
Yeah, and it's what it is, it's like almost like, you know, like, I'm just gonna do my thing, man, like, you know? So again, that whole era of the 1920s is something that, it's very unbelievable.
Awesome. Johan did give us some more details. He said a pump track is a cycling circuit of bumps and hills. And he has an old picture linked too. If you want to take a minute.
Oh, he said the BMX track, all right, I mean, that's I might be a little younger than him. So what happened with the BMX track, right, and now you know exactly what he's talking about, Bruin Stadium up there. Again, the county, right, and again, like a lot of things, safety becomes an issue, right? The track kind of started to be used by the general public versus having events set up at it, and insurance became extremely high on it, right? So you have kids riding bikes there, nobody's watching, somebody slips and falls. Who's mom and dad gonna, you know, somebody's gotta have to answer for it. So the BMX track kind of dies with, I think, the safety issues that take over in the late 80s, early 90s. You know, the whole helmet, you know, pads argument, and try getting listen, I work with teenage kids every day, so try getting them to throw a helmet on, you know what I mean? It's not gonna go well. So I think the county, right, decided maybe it was just better to play it safe, right, and shut it down. But yeah, ultimately, that's what it comes down to.
We used to actually have Boy Scout camporees in Hudson County.
Right, yeah, I've seen it, and there's the tricentennial tree is up there in the park right now, so I think that plaque has been eaten up by that tree, but that, yeah, the tree's there, you know, so yeah, you're right, they had all these crazy events there. The park was actually a really lively place for like social clubs to meet, you know, and like I said, the Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts would meet up there, and, you know, huge sporting groups would meet up there. The tennis courts actually hosted like these tri-state tennis tournaments every year for about 20 years.
They used to have clay courts. That was one of the only places around where they actually had clay tennis.
Yes, and that was the big draw for them, right? It was something different.
To come on with my socks red from clay.
Oh, yeah. So again, yeah, the park is a staple in the town history.
Question that I had in the chat.
All right. I feel like I got peppered tonight.
There were a lot of questions.
A little bit of everything tonight.
I want to say a big thank you to you, Michael Mering, to Mayor Sacco, to the Hudson County Office of Cultural Affairs for sponsoring tonight's program. And thank you for everyone for both attending in person and attending via the Zoom program.
Sure. Thanks, everybody. Hope to see you at
Thank
the next one.
Thank you.
Thank you.